Afternoon, everyone. It's 12:31. We're going to go ahead and get started with our presentation. Welcome to the H&Y with Kiefer session on lattice versus ladder, rethinking the traditional healthcare leadership path. My name is Carl Marie Memnon, and I'm the president of Healthcare Leaders of New York. I'm excited to have you all here with us today for the second webinar as part of our Executive Essential Career Professional Development Series in collaboration with Kiefer. This will truly be an educational program. Next slide. Today's session is approved for one qualifying education credit by ACHE. Please visit ache.org to self-record your credit. Participants in this program who wish to have it considered for ACHE qualifying credit should list their attendance when they apply to ACHE's for advancement or recertification. Copy of this presentation will be distributed after the session. It is truly my honor to introduce our moderator for the session, Brittany Foster, administrator for the Department of Orthopedics at TJH Medical Services and Healthcare Leader of New York, board member at large, Long Island. Brittany?
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Brittany. I am the administrator for Orthomedicist Health Network and it's affiliate of Jamaica and Flushing Hospital. And as well as Carl Marie said, I'm also part of Healthcare Leaders in New York, board member at large. I will serve as your moderator of today's webinar, Lattice versus Ladder, Rethinking the Traditional Healthcare Leadership Path. The healthcare landscape is continuously changing. With this in mind, as healthcare professionals, we also need to evaluate and reevaluate ourselves, competencies, and how they relate to our career journeys. Today's webinars will be affiliated with Kiefer. Kiefer is a premier executive search and leadership advisory firm developing impactful leadership teams for organizations that improve quality of life, including those in healthcare, academic medicine, the life sciences, and higher education. In business for 55 years, the firm's services and solutions include executive recruiting, leadership advising and coaching, and interim leadership placements. Learn more about Kiefer at www.withkiefer.com. And now today I would like to welcome today's panelists, Rachel Polimis, who is a senior partner of healthcare, and Jason Petros, executive partner of executive search.
Thank you very much, Brittany. Really pleased to be here today. Rachel Polimis from Whit Kiefer. I'm a senior partner and board member with the firm. I've been with Whit Kiefer now supporting executive searches for the last 20 years and specialize in healthcare, and I'm based in Bethesda, Maryland. Look forward to a great discussion today, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Jason.
Thank you, Rachel. Jason Petros, and thank you, Brittany, for that wonderful introduction. I've been doing this work for about 18 years. So between Rachel and I, you've got almost half a century of experience between the two of us, but who's counting? And we're really excited to talk about your careers today and how to think about and advance and accelerate some of those careers in light of some of the ongoing market dynamics. So with that said, if we could move to the next slide. And Rachel, do you want to tee us up?
Yeah, absolutely. And as Jason said, we're really looking forward to a great discussion today. The way we have this laid out, we'll have some time in between different sections for you all to ask some questions. But we're going to kick off with really talking about the shifting career landscape and what that looks like. What are some of the major competencies that we're seeing in the marketplace that are in high demand, quite frankly, that you can start thinking about and honing. Next, we're going to talk about rethinking career development. And as mentioned with Jason, the lattice and the ladder versus, do you advance your career horizontally to go vertically or just vertically? So there's things we're going to talk through. And quite frankly, what's your path? There's not a perfect path, and there's different ways to advance your career. So we're looking forward to having that and then having a Q&A. If we could advance to the next slide, please. Before we kick off, and we know that there's a number, I think we've got about 75 participants, and I think that's going to continue to grow. But I think it's going to be helpful for us to just have a quick poll to understand where you are in your career. And I can see it's already getting kicked off here. Just to get a sense of the types of career spots everybody's in here. So we'll just give this a minute. It's just helpful for us to get a framework where what's going to be of interest to you. And we can see obviously a lot of mid-careers here that are moving into leadership and establishing leadership. So this is really helpful. Wonderful. Perfect. Great. Maybe we'll just move to the next poll if you all don't mind, just to go through. So we're going to ask you another question as far as where is your highest career priority at this point in time? So really understanding, are you looking to make a career transition, looking for a new job, promotion, leadership, looking to get an additional degree? So thank you for responding to this as well. Just helps give us context on our audience today. Lots of promotion interest and new jobs.
Hope nobody's boss is on the call today.
Great opportunity for us to source you all. Just kidding. This is helpful. It looks like, so thank you. That's great. So a lot of promotions and really, quite frankly, developing your leadership skills. So wonderful. Thank you. I think we can end the poll now. Jason?
Thank you. So what we really want to talk about here is the shifting career landscape. And so Brittany, if you just want to go to the next slide for me so we can share what we mean by how the landscape has shifted. You know, I think if we go back to the 1970s, about 10% of hospitals were part of larger organized and integrated healthcare systems. That's 50 hospitals, give or take, across the entire country at that time. If we fast forward to 2019, that number ballooned to almost 70% of hospitals becoming part of larger systems. We all know what happened in 2019. We don't need to relitigate that. But if we fast forward that shift has continued to accelerate. So while we're still waiting to see some of the data, I would say, finger to the air, anecdotally, 75 to 80% of the market at this point is now part of a larger system, which means our industry collectively has consolidated at a real clip over the last decades. Locally, you know who they are, right? Northwell, NYU, Mount Sinai, New York, everybody is sort of gathering and consolidating to the extent that they can. And what that means is that these positions, these executive level roles, are in high demand. And the skill sets that we are developing need to be tuned and attuned to some of the demand that we're seeing. So what does this mean for you? I had a client and I was working with them on organizational design. So we were trying to identify structures. And what we noticed in the discussion, this is a couple of years back, was we had 14 hospitals, we had 15 CEOs. We had 15 CFOs, 15 CHROs, we had 15 COOs. I think you're getting where I'm going. So eventually it got to the appropriate question, which is who is actually responsible for what? And where that narrowed to was we have one CEO and we have presidents. We have one chief operating officer. We have vice presidents of operations. We have a singular CHRO. And so as these systems have grown larger, the skill sets or the expected opportunities to develop your skill set has actually become narrower, right? Singular CFO, which means your VP of finance locally is not actually responsible in the same way for the entire portfolio, including things like managing the treasury function, managing the finance subcommittee of the board, et cetera. In addition to that, we've got a workforce which has dramatically shifted. You know, as of January this year, and we're going to share some data later on in the discussion today, the demographics have advanced in such a way that we're seeing job openings higher than pre-pandemic levels. And we're seeing people quitting at lower levels. pre-pandemic. And that mix, matched with the consolidation I just mentioned, means that the demand for workers in the industries that we're serving is super high. But the supply of those workers with the developed skill sets appropriate for the highest level jobs in these organizations and these systems is significantly lower. So when you talk about folks being in their mid-career, right, mid-40s, bottom of the smile curve in terms of the most level of responsibility at home, the most level of responsibility in your career, and pressures as a result of that coming from all dimensions, means you have to think about your career perhaps a little bit differently. And all of this, of course, is under the umbrella of what happened in 2019. So we have to really wrestle with the fact that our jobs have kind of changed a little bit. Our industry has changed a lot. And we have to develop a skill set which is going to match all of those changes. So do you mind taking us forward, Brittany?
So just tagging on to what Jason shared here, going back to what he was speaking to as far as just fewer C-suite roles with that consolidation, where there's one CEO and there's, one system CFO. Those roles, many of the positions that previously were held by, quote, a CEO have changed in title to more of administrator or president, and the scope of those roles have changed. It's interesting to look back. We've had, given, as I guess Jason quoted, our almost 40 plus years of doing search together. What's interesting is if you spoke with CEOs about 15 years ago, many of them would tell you that, when they were 25, they were given the keys to be the CEO of the hospital and reported to a board. That has all changed. The market is different today. And what we have found is that many organizations are not seeing the skill set of executives because they are not getting exposed to whether it's board function or the finances or the bond markets because of the fewer C-suite roles. And they're coming in at a role where their scope is sort of focused more on ensuring that the hospital is running effectively or the service line is running effectively. So the shifting of C-suite roles and the lack of scope around what you're being exposed to at an early part of your career has definitely impacted the industry. There's a lot more specialization in all levels, which I do think creates a lot of opportunity where, as an executive, mid-career, if you decided you wanted to really focus your career on being a chief quality officer, you really could start your career early on, focus on quality, continue to grow, look at a CQO role, look at a larger system CQO role, et cetera. The part that I always caution mid-careerists and others around is just knowing what your end game is, because as you specialize, at times it can be harder to move back into a general role because you get pigeonholed in some ways of being the subject matter expert, which I think is a great space to be, but it's just something to consider when you're thinking about your career and what direction you want to go. The financial challenges in the marketplace has definitely impacted executive roles as far as where organizations are willing to fill roles or willing to live without those roles or take that scope and consolidate it into another position and have somebody else cover it. So it creates less market opportunities for individuals as they're moving through their career progression. Ongoing external threats to the traditional business model. So as you all are seeing the private equity spaces come in, the changing reimbursement, you're seeing organizations and health systems consolidate and jump across different state lines to do that. Just look at Atrium Advocate and that model and how that's impacting the roles and the types of positions that are available. And quite frankly, just the centralization of organizations where they're creating more of that model where you've got a solution center. So if you're a chief human resource officer, your scope may be different because you might not own all of the benefits scope. You might not own some of the behind the scenes HRS components as well. So we're just seeing a lot of dynamics impacting opportunities for executives. So it's really important to think and be planful about how you want to look at your career. Next slide. So as Jason was alluding to, we're going to go through a couple of different data points today. This is a pretty interesting slide. So you can see, where there is the biggest market and sort of distribution by age as far as where careerists, and this is probably mostly related to you all, in that 38%, that's 40% of the market of the overall workforce is below the age of 50. When you start combining that with the 50 to 54-year-olds, I mean, that's over half of the marketplace today, which is, I think, a pretty interesting statistic. I think aspects of that speak to individuals working longer. When I first started doing search, 50, by the way, was retirement. 50 was 70. And people, it was, there would be organizations that would look at a resume and they'd say, oh, well, they're 50, they're probably going to retire in 2 years. That's completely changed. We're seeing people work a lot later. We could provide you plenty of examples of we're seeing CEOs and system COOs who are 74 years old who are continuing to go at it strong because, life expectancy is, shifted, and there's, people are living longer, different opportunities for individuals. So it's interesting to see sort of the market overall demographics that way. Gender diversity, which we're really pleased to see, is moving the needle 45%. We want to continue to see a gender balance in the marketplace, as well as when we're looking at ethnic diversity. That's something that Jason and I and our firm is very passionate about, is really looking at the marketplace and ensuring there's diversity at all different levels of an organization to really create inclusive environments. So that's something that's really important to us. Just as a side note, from a interesting statistic, the average tenure that we're seeing in organizations today, which I think is a pretty interesting thing compared to what we saw 10 years ago, is about 4.9 years. That is very different for the healthcare market today. Previously, you'd see, and the expectation was to see somebody stay in a role for about 8 years. That has definitely changed. And I think influences from other industries have played a part into that. So when you look at, information technology, and you look at sort of private equity, people move every 2 years and it's accepted. So healthcare is beginning to see a shift in that as well, as far as individuals moving and having an opportunity to grow and not needing to stay that 8-year time frame in an organization.
That's exactly right. If I would add to that, Richard, those of you, as we saw at the beginning, right, many of you are sort of establishing your leadership roles today. And while our conversation today is ostensibly about your career, there's also an aspect of succession planning that needs to happen, right? Because you are not alone, right? And in the same way you're looking to advance your career, there are others who are looking to advance into your positions. And when you think about that 4.9 years in terms of potential tenure, you really need to be preparing succession planning earlier on in your tenure in a vice president level or higher position, because you cannot lose the sort of knowledge basis that you're creating in your institution as a result of the acceleration you want to see in your career. So if we could go forward, Brittany, thank you. So we also want to talk about, and I think the meat of the conversation today is competencies that are really in demand, right? Because as Rachel and I have continued to interview, and we do, give or take a couple hundred searches per year with 5 to 8 candidates per search. Those are average numbers, sometimes a little higher, sometimes a little lower. We have a bird's eye view and a ground level view of what these leaders are doing to develop themselves in the interests of larger positions. So Brittany, if you'll take us one slide forward. So here are what we've seen and what ACHE has actually developed in terms of some of the competencies that are being assessed today. Now, these are broad brushes, and we'll get a little bit more specific a slide later. But communication, you cannot over-communicate. It is close to impossible to do that. And so the more you can focus on communication and relationship management, the better off you will be for it. Leadership is sort of the umbrella marker here. And goodness gracious, there hasn't been a time in our history where leadership hasn't been challenged in the way that it is today. When you talk about trying to manage a workforce that goes from, Generation Z to the baby boomers, you have to figure out how to communicate people in a language that they're going to understand, right? So figuring out each other's professional love language becomes critical to your success as a leader and your success in creating accountability in your own structure. Obviously, knowledge of the healthcare environment, the beauty and the biggest challenge that we have in the industry is that, yeah, Peter Drucker called it. He said, healthcare systems are the most complicated human-created organisms known to man. And I would completely agree with that comment. I think that we have to wrestle with the fact that although we have complexity, that doesn't mean things are hard or impossible to do. The way to get through that complexity is to establish knowledge in a wider way and to establish such through communication and relationship management. And frankly, I view professionalism, business skills, and knowledge as table stakes, right? If you don't have either one of those things, this is not the right career for you at this point in time. So Brittany, can you take us one slide forward? So as we mentioned before, hundreds of searches. Rachel and I have sort of dove into, on every one of those searches, we do something called a leadership profile. And in that leadership profile, we hear from executives in institutions, literally from Hawaii to North Carolina, Texas to Minnesota, and beyond that globally. And once we start to figure out what the layers and lenses are that people are actually looking for, these are the things. These are really the 5 things, when distilled, that most healthcare organizations are looking for in their next generation of leaders. Customer centricity. Just because it's easy for me, does that mean it's easy for the patient? Rachel talked 15 years ago, when we were talking to physician leaders, it was all about the physician's schedule. It was all about the physician's calendar. And it was the physician as the center of gravity in the healthcare organization. There's still some truth to that. But I think what we've gotten along to is more of a center of gravity around the patient as a customer and as a consumer. And for those that can get that right, you will establish loyalty in a referral base that you have never seen before. Some of that is on the basis and on the table of technology, but by and large, it's putting the patient at the center of everything that you're doing in a very real way, not just in a way which gives it language, but not necessarily action. Working the matrix. I said at the top of this discussion that over 80% of organizations today are part of a larger healthcare system. We know that they're the most complex organisms that humans have ever created. What that means is the days of holding company model where you do your own thing in a department and you do your own thing over there in orthopedics, and sometimes we'll come together and talk about best practices and go back to our corners, are gone. And so you have to figure out how to establish your, and this applies to your career too. It's not just departmental. It's actually individually. How do you work yourself in the matrix? So what are the skill sets that you need to develop that you don't have today, right? It's not about title. It's about establishing and pulling best practices from different areas, the same way Da Vinci did, or anybody who's come up through a liberal arts education does. You beg, borrow, steal, and then you develop yourself and develop your own voice as an executive. Financial and operational acumen. If you don't have that, it's going to be a tough career for you over the next couple of years. So you really have to be tight around return on some of the investment, return on some of the action that you're doing, return on some of the actions that your colleagues and your teams are taking. And last but not last or least, but empathy. The uniqueness of the healthcare market requires us to put ourselves in other people's shoes all the time. And so there's an idea of servant leadership that exists, but I would describe that more as being empathetic to all that you're serving, right? Leading, knowing when to lead from the front and knowing when to lead from behind, knowing when to use your title and your particular position and knowing when you can influence things without a title or a particular position. As you develop trust, coming off the ACHE conference early last week, I was in a session with Warner Thomas at Sutter Health opposite coast. He talked about the development of trust as a triangle. And the 3 parts of those triangle are logic, rationale, transparency, and vulnerability. And if you can establish all of those things in your teams and in yourself, you're going to position yourself for greater success later on in your career. And in the middle of that triangle is inclusion. So it's including other people. It's not always about us, right? And the most difficult thing for those of us that are really ambitious and looking to accelerate our careers is to remember that our ambition is a result of our passion for the work that we do. And that passion for the work that we do means supporting those who support those at the bedside at the end of the day. Rachel, anything you might add, or should we move on?
I think you hit upon it really well. I mean, I think, for me, it's the ability to be vulnerable. And I think that's interesting. Today, there was an article in Becker's I don't know if anyone's read Becker's yet today. And Dennis Pullen from Virtua Health talked a lot about quiet management and how he's practiced quiet management and not being a micromanager and having and being vulnerable. And I think that's led to a lot of his successes as a leader, is allowing himself to be vulnerable so people could relate to him, and having that quiet style about him. It's just such a key trait in the ability to really, I think, develop and be comfortable in that space. Really helps you evolve as a leader.
Totally agree. Brittany, will you take us forward?
So we wanted to stop here and pause. And I know, again, we want to make certain you feel like you're getting what you need from this credit today, and the ability to ask us questions. We know we've got about 90 participants on right now. And so if anyone wanted to ask questions before we moved on to the second part of our presentation, we'd like to pause.
I guess I just wanted to ask, how can we take a step back as leaders in terms of that ambition while ensuring inclusion? What are steps or tools that you've seen or used that we could, in terms of coming to that realization and then providing the space to ensure all rise up to help us in the work?
Jason, you want to start?
Yeah, well, I think that's a great question, and that's why we're smiling at each other as I reflect on that. I think you need to create shared ambition, right? So again, it needs to be more about the work that you're trying to do and less about yourself. So a piece of advice that I often give to executives as they're looking at their next position, as we try to coach them on the interview, is, when you get a question like, why is this right for you right now? Right? The answer is not because it's the next logical step in my career, which is not differentiating for you at all against any competition for any job you're ever going to look for. The right answer is, this organization and this community has a particular need. And because I've followed Jason and Rachel's advice around developing my career in terms of a lattice versus a ladder, I have a particular skill set and a set of skills that I've gathered over the course of time that allow me to help with that particular need, right? So it's putting the organization and the needs of others at the center of the table. That doesn't mean you're taking yourself out of the equation. On the contrary, it's saying that I have something unique that I can do because of my lived experience, right? Regardless of where you're coming from professionally, and that should help others. I don't know if that gets exactly at your question, but I hope that might help.
There's a couple questions I can see coming in here that I wanted to just answer. One, I think Dr. Liana Lanug, and I hope I pronounced your name correctly, so I apologize. And it was, how do medical directors develop the financial and operational acumen needed for training, since you're mostly focused on the primary clinical side of it? And that's a great question, because that is an important aspect, as being a clinically trained individual who wants to move into more of a administrative role. And there's always the MBA route. We see that quite a bit, but there's also the ability to inside an organization, whether it's getting on task forces, getting on committees, and asking to take on the support of the financial operation of that various project. Quite frankly, it's getting mentored by your VP of finance, your CFO, building that relationship and asking them to develop and work with you to help develop an understanding of the P&L. Because many times they're going to say in return, how about you give me more of an understanding of the clinical side of the house and the operational side of the house, so I become much more in tune. So there's ways to look inside an organization for those, as well as externally.
I think that's exactly right. Another one of these questions is, how do we determine that a leader has the necessary soft skills to be successful? Any interview process is really about all of the inputs that you can control, or the outputs that you can control as a potential candidate, and not worrying so much about those that you can't. So when you talk about soft skills in an executive interview process, you'll typically be going through a bunch of different stages. At every stage along the way, you're going to be meeting people that that aren't making the hiring decision, right? And what those soft skills are about is how you treat others along the way, right? So one of the secrets that I will often think about is, how does this person treat those that are opening the door for them? Do they open the door for others? Are they going to pick up that tissue that they see on the floor at a hospital? Are they taking ownership of every space that they're in? How are they treating those who are helping to set up interviews? Are they demanding? Are they appreciative? Are they curious? Every single conversation that you have, you are on stage in an interview process. And that is the way we really seek out some of those soft skills.
Another question. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, please, Rachel, you're going to do the same thing I was.
For health system executives interested in moving to the provider side, and having seen great leaders such as Amir Rubin do this, our advice would be is, as you're looking at organizations, if you're looking to make a move, look at an organization, a health organization that has an insurance plan of some sort. So you're exposed to the full side, whether it's a UPMC or an AHN or, other organizations that may have, have their own small insurance plan inside. It's a great way to get exposed and understanding of the insurance part, as well as many of those organizations. And if you wanted to go strictly to, for instance, Humana or the Blues or a place like that, they're looking for someone who's had the experience on both the provider and payer side, or come out of an organization that has both components. So that would be something I would be looking at if I were looking to really sort of shift my career down the road.
I agree. There are two questions that are somewhat related. One is in terms of servant leadership, how can we lead this concept without being taken advantage of, or without being challenged? And then another is really a question around, do I need to continue to specialize as I grow my career? These are closely related for the following reasons. As you grow in your career and as you become higher level executives, you need to be more comfortable with not knowing things, right? And just because you are servicing others in your particular role doesn't mean you're a pushover. On the contrary, right? It means you are ready to ask a difficult question in the moment. And then the next day when you see that person in the hallway, you still greet them with a smile on your face, right? So being a servant leader doesn't mean not being aggressive or assertive. It means identifying the real root cause of the particular issue and getting beyond the ticky-tack day-to-day tactical stuff and considering some of the cultural implications of what you're doing. And Sean, relative to your question about specialization, I actually believe that the more comfortable you are without knowing something and more curious you get, that becomes more important as you grow in your leadership style. You're never going to know everything. Some CEOs are leading organizations with 155,000 employees. There is no possible way for anybody on God's green earth to be able to understand what every single one of those 155,000 employees are doing. So it becomes more about leading others and empowering them to do the work that you're doing while maintaining your focus on what's true and what's right.
Should we, I think there's, trying to see if there's any more questions in the chat. Sorry. Maybe we should keep moving to the next slide and then we'll go back to this all.
Yeah.
So is that okay?
Sounds great.
All right. So rethinking, this is the part of the presentation we really want to talk about, the rethinking of career development, the lattice versus the ladder. And as we said at the beginning, there's different approaches. There's not a, one size fits all at all around this. And, everyone has a different story of how they rose to the position they're in, and everyone has a different path. And there's not a right or wrong answer. So just know that going into how you're thinking about what's next for you. And so it's important as you kick off and you're thinking about what's next is really to explore personally, as far as what are the things that you enjoy that you're doing? What are the things that bring you joy in the work you're doing? What are the things you want to make certain you retain in what's next for you, so that it's something you continue to do? I think it's also really important to be reflective and thinking about what things don't bring you joy. What are the things that you quite frankly, don't want to be involved in, whether it's, potentially, a certain part of scope, whether it's working inside the hospital, working in an ambulatory setting. Sometimes it's thinking about, I work for a big national system and I'd rather work for a smaller independent system, or I'd rather be in rural healthcare versus urban healthcare. So it's really important to do your own personal inventory to understand what are the things that you want to retain before making a step, because that part of it, the grass isn't always greener on the other side just to make a move to advance. You might be moving into an advancement, but you might not be moving into a place where you're really excited about. So sort of exploring, being thoughtful, start planning. And when I say planning, it's not just, I'm going to plan to make a move. It's thinking about, who do you know in a position that you want to move to, whether it's, I want to move into Jason's role because I really like what he's doing. I'm going to seek Jason out and I'm going to ask him, what did he do to get to where he is in his position? Really start to look at your mentors and ask questions around, what did they do? Who did they talk to? How did they move their career along? It's also really, as you're planning, it's really important to start building out your network, whether it's on LinkedIn, whether it's through an association like the New York Leaders, whether it's through ACHE, whether it's through AHA, whether it's through NASHE or NALI, whatever network it is, build that out. Build out networks within executive search firms. I'd say we're the best, but there are other firms that do get some search work. So start to build those out, build those relationships out. And it's important too, as you're planning, that this whole part is thinking about, what do you want to act on? Don't just apply to 1,000 positions because you really want to get out of your organization, or you really want to advance your career. It's acting on the ones that make sense, acting on the ones that you think align to what you want to do next. And then as you get responses around that, it's assessing, is the grass really greener on the other side? How does this bring value? How do I bring value to the organization, and ensuring that the mission is aligned with your own personal mission as well. Many times we see individuals that reach out back to us after 6 months of being in a new position, and they realize that this was the wrong move for them. And so much of it's based on culture and mission. So really assess, what is the culture? Ask the difficult questions to the hiring leader. Really understand, what are the culture components? What's the mission? How does it align to you? And what are your core values? Jason, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would add two things, right? On the question of mentorship and the question of networking. A mentor is not somebody who you have coffee with and you say, how did you get to become a CEO? And then you walk away with all the keys of the kingdom. You have to be very specific and focused, right? So you will have mentors that don't know they're your mentors, and you will have those that have taken a professional and personal interest in your development of your career. What you need to do in those relationships is treat them with the respect that they deserve, meaning be specific about the things you're looking for. Be specific with the questions you are bringing them. Don't expect them to just light your path for you because you're as special as Rachel and I are. And on the networking side, folks often think of networking as something dirty. I mean, quite literally dirty. Like, folks will wash their hands after hearing that word oftentimes. And being very specific and planful as you're going into events. Who do you want to talk to? What would you like to talk to them about? What do you do as a next step? That's how you start to develop professional mentors that are outside your current organization or elsewhere. So those would be my two adds to that commentary. Brittany, can you take us forward?
So work-life balance, and this is something that's really important to all of us and very important to Jason and I. As you're assessing and thinking about, all of that work before, sort of planning, acting, assessing, all of that, you've got to think about work-life balance. You have to think about, what are the things that are going to bring you joy? What are the things that are going to ensure that you're balancing things in your life that are just as important as work? Thinking about your family, how does this impact your family? If you have kids, how old are your kids? If you make a move and leave New York and move to Minnesota, what are your school age kids? Are there high school kids? Is this the right time to make a move? Does this job provide flexibility so that my kids could stay, if they're high school kids, they could stay back in New York and I could come back and forth? Those are really important factors. If you have a significant other that's got a job that's not remote, what are the job opportunities for them, ensuring that they have an opportunity to find and seek employment? Because you want to make certain that you're not moving to a new role and your significant other is moving to a new city with you and they don't have a network and outlet. And what happens is what we see many times are your significant others, their unhappiness creates the I need to look again in 6 months scenario. I think a big question I always ask people is, does the job bring you joy? Going back to what I said earlier, if this new opportunity does not bring you joy, you're not going to perform at your best. You're not going to be, at your highest impact value for that organization and for the team that you're supporting. Does this job provide you with the ability to have work-life balance? Can you go to the gym at the end of the day or the beginning of the day? How do you fit in sort of your own mental fitness in your overall new opportunity? How do you fit in exercise and those aspects? How do you do things outside of work? So when you're looking at a new opportunity, you need to understand as you're interviewing on site with others, I would quite frankly ask people, how do you spend your day? What does free time look like for you all? When you're looking at a new job, you should be interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. So you really understand how this could impact you as a person and your family.
Let's be honest. If things aren't working at home, they're not going to be working at work, right? So you need to be cognizant that both things feed into one another and they feed into each other in a very real way, which can have positive or dispositive effects on your mental health. And that is really important as a leader, is you do have to put your oxygen mask on first, often, so you can support those that need you in the moments they need you most.
Go to the
Brittany?
next slide.
Just gotta light your path. Right. So a lot of what we've talked about is sort of tactical in the moment. What's the next job? You should never be looking at the next job without thinking what the one after that is. And what we mean by that is, how does this prepare you for the ultimate goal, right? So if you've got a dream board like I do that has, bedrooms on the house and a new garage and a nice yard and a new dog and a career title or whatever it might be for you, then you have to think about what's actually going to get you there. It's not necessarily the title. It's the things that you need to develop, and not to repeat myself, but it is the things that make you unique and differentiate you in such a way that when that opportunity comes about and you're perfect for it, you apply for it, you get it, and then you're on to the next opportunity. And you've got to keep a journal of successes. We work, 16, 17-hour days at certain moments in our career. And, you can look back at a situation late last week. I woke up on a Wednesday morning and I said hi to my daughter and I said, "It's Friday today." And she said, "Dad, it's not even close to being Friday," right? So if you're not actually allowing yourself to be present in that moment and keeping a journal, what's going really well, what isn't going well, you can actually lose time in your brain and physically. And the one of the biggest questions Rachel and I get is like, well, how do I become a CEO? And the pat answer is, well, if you're a CEO, it's a lot easier to become a CEO. The truth is, you've got to volunteer. You've got to take opportunities in an extracurricular way that will stretch you, right, and allow you to get exposure to things. So related to the question from our physician colleague, we talked about, how do I get the financial acumen that prepares me to do something a little bit differently? This is how it happens. You participate on the comp committee with your medical group, right? You start to ask to shadow one of your financial partners or your VPs of operations. How are you reading this data and what does it actually mean to you? What are the things you look out for and you don't look out for? And then you apply those lessons in opportunities that are outside your day job, so to speak. We are a society which really likes to wear our successes on our t-shirts. And I think we have to be a lot more comfortable with ownership over our failures. and a lot more comfortable in terms of discussing those failures, because if we go back to the competencies that are really important for leaders in the future, vulnerability was one of the top ones. The way you express vulnerability in an interview or in a conversation is not, I suck. It's, I sucked at that, and here's what I learned from it, and here's how I did it next time. And that can help your teams learn from you, and it can help show those that are above you in the organizational structure that you're paying attention to yourself and you have enough self-awareness to realize that that didn't go so well, and next time it's going to get a lot better. Next slide, please.
So we're going to pause here for questions. And I know there's been a few that have been going through the chat here. Feel free to dial them in or ask them.
Hi, I have a question. First, hi, Rachel, Christina. We know each other from the past. Nice to see you. Hi, Jason. So what advice would you give leaders working in other industries who are thinking about making the jump to healthcare?
It's a great question. And I would say it because I did it. I came from a different industry and I came into executive search. In the approach I always give and the advice I give is think about your functional capabilities. You know, what are your functional capabilities that you can bring over into healthcare? And that is, you know, especially we see that happen with human resources. We see that happen with marketing. We see that happening with, and sometimes in finance. We see that happen in operations as well, especially. So whether it's, I mean, HR is an easy one from an operations perspective, is really taking what you've done operationally and having it, thinking about how you can relate that to running operations, running a service line in an organization, and sort of speak to it in those terms is really the areas that I would emphasize. I would start networking, obviously, and I think Andrew Chen wrote that in this chat. I could see that you can't get anything done without searching his Rolodex. And it really is. It's about how much you network and really speak to that skill. We see that being based in the DC area. I do a lot of work with military. And there's always the biggest challenge is people who are leaving the military and transitioning to the civilian space, where the military for a long time had this, you know, there was sort of the stigma around that it's a very top-down environment. And in fact, it quite frankly isn't. You know, their leadership that you develop, and that's another skill that you could take from a functional area. The leadership that they've developed in the military is quite frankly almost stronger than an MBA or an MHA. I mean, there's the training that they get around leadership, building teams to support them in times of war and in times of crisis. Those are skills to use. Every industry has crisis communication, you know, whether it's around, everyone went through COVID, no matter what industry you went through. So you had to hone your crisis communication skills. So really taking all of that and thinking about how you can make it relatable to healthcare. Jason, anything you'd want to add?
Yeah, you know, this is one where as much as we are an inclusive industry, we're also one of the most exclusive industries in the history of the world. Right? Meaning we are very focused on degrees. We are very focused on having 17 years of experience, sometimes in spaces that haven't been around for 17 years. And so the only way to sort of get around that is you're going to have to take a little bit of a step back, right? It's very hard to enter into a healthcare organization, often at an equivalent level, without understanding the dynamics of your providers, without understanding the dynamics of your patients, your communities, et cetera, right? The inputs and outputs that are happening in a healthcare system are just very different than many of the others that you've seen. So I agree with Rachel wholeheartedly around, there are certain positions that it can be a little bit easier. I'd add experience to that mix, right? So patient, employee experience, wellness, et cetera. You know, there's some translational skill sets that can occur there, but don't be afraid to sort of take a little bit of a dip in order to create a larger hockey stick like trajectory in the future.
Thanks.
We have a question around how does one create life to work balance when the job does not offer flexibility due to leadership changes and extra responsibilities? It's a great question because we're seeing that across the board, as you know, change. Many times individuals are given more responsibility and sometimes not without additional pay, which is something we would say, make certain you're asking for that. But what I would say to you, and it is hard because it's you know, you want to perform, you want to execute, you want to deliver what's being asked of you. If possible, if I were, you know, in that circus, my watch is going off, is to really develop quiet time on your calendar. Develop it at the beginning of the day, whether it's 15 minutes in the middle of the day or a block of time at the end of the day. You can control your calendar, and it's really important that you think about how you want to create that quiet space for yourself, that you're, you know, giving yourself, you know, a few minutes to breathe. We're all of us are, I think, probably perfectionists, and we want to, you know, deliver. But if you're not finding that time, at the end of the day, you're going to create your own burnout, and that burnout will impact you, will impact your family, will impact the others around you. It's really looking for internally for yourself to create that space, and being proactive about it.
Yeah. People think about work-life balance as, you know, if I have 60 minutes in a day, 30 minutes of that is going to be my life, and 30 minutes of that is going to be my work. It's a terrible way to think about it, right? The better way to think about this are what are the active choices that I'm going to make professionally and personally in this particular season, right? So you can't expect that I'm only going to work 3.5 days this week because I want balance in my life. That's not the industry that we're in, right? What you can say is, in this moment, given the goals that I currently have, I'm going to make some sacrifices personally. And I'm going to make those sacrifices so that I can not have to make them later on in my professional career. Or right now, in this moment, I have 2 young kids at home and they drive me crazy. I'm going to make some sacrifices professionally because right now that's more important to me than the professional side. And so it gets to be about being honest with yourself around the choices and not trying to do everything all at once, because we are human beings at the end of the day, right? And we have lives to lead. And if you want a full and impactful life, you have to be realistic and okay. In other words, not regretful about the choices that you're making in terms of balancing one or the other. How do you say no without feel like losing out as FOMO? Well, what do you think about that one, Rachel?
Well, somebody who has high FOMO, it's probably that it's getting comfortable. It's honestly, and that I am somebody who has high FOMO, so I can honestly say that about myself. It's knowing that it's okay to not be a part of whether it's a decision being made or a project being done or sitting on a task force or sitting on a committee, because you know for yourself it's sort of the right hygiene for you to just say no because you need to have a bit more balance. And it's the hardest thing to practice. And where I practice it actually was personally first before I brought it into myself professionally. So I was, you know, if I said no to some social situations with family, friends, or just friends in general, and knowing I was going to be uncomfortable in that space, to ready myself to say no internally for professional opportunities. It's the hard, it is a very difficult thing, but if you can practice it and find ways to do it in smaller ways, you can find ways to do it in different ways when there's larger projects that you just can't be a part of.
That's totally right. You know, I think in some ways it's starting to diminish the shoulds from your life. Meaning, I should do this. I should go to that wedding. I should do X, Y, or Z. It's starting to shave away some of those shoulds and doing the things which are want to or coulds. And I think that's one way to make some better decisions that will lead to a less regretful year, month, 3 years.
You show up better. You really do. When you're able to say no to the other priorities, you just show up more present, more available, and you actually perform just better in general. Let's see if there's any other questions in the chat.
I'd just like to thank the group that's joined. This has been super engaging, thought-provoking, at least from my perspective. In speaking for both Rachel and I, here's our contact information. Please reach out.
Yep.
We're both on LinkedIn. Our names are spelled the way they're spelled on the screen right now. You can find us, and we're happy to help in any way that we can.
Thank you so much, Rachel and Jason, for a meaningful discussion and providing us with information to reflect on. I will now turn over to Darren, who's our president-elect for Healthcare Leaders of New York, for closing remarks.
Well, first and foremost, what an incredible session today. Thank you again, Jason and Rachel and Brittany, for really bringing this topic forward, inspiring us in terms of a professional love language, focusing on inclusion, transparency, and trust, and truly being servant leaders in terms of fostering environments that enable us to grow and move forward in our careers and profession. We are better together. And I really am grateful for the advice and the insights provided today. On behalf of Healthcare Leaders of New York, thank you to all that attended and participated. On the next slide, there will be a QR code in terms of giving us some feedback in regards to this session. So please take a moment to scan the QR code, complete the survey, and provide us some feedback related to this session and how we can continue to provide value and insights for our members and beyond. Next slide. I want to remind our membership at large that our membership survey is ending today. So please, this is our Healthcare Leaders of New York survey that really speaks to the things that our membership would like to see and gives us back data and information to help continue to improve and add value for our members. So please complete this survey, and if you complete it, there is a raffle, as you may have noticed, across our social media platforms for those that have won the raffle already. So complete the survey and enter for a chance to win something special from Healthcare Leaders of New York. Next slide. And as a wonderful reminder, we do have some upcoming events. One of our incredible signature events for Healthcare Leaders of New York, our 17th annual Cocktails with the Chief, which will be hosted at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center at their Zuckerman Research Center on 68th Street on April 18th. So please, the event is open for registration, and we're so excited to have our membership and everyone join us at that event, along with other upcoming events you can see on the slide in terms of our website for more to come. Next slide. And as always, we cannot do this incredible work without our sponsors. To our sponsors, thank you for your support. Without you, the work that Hilney does for our members, the value added, wouldn't be possible. So once again, thank you to our sponsors. Next slide. Once again, everyone, it was my pleasure, along with the rest of our board and our panelists for today from Whit Kiefer. Thank you. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you at our next upcoming events.